And welcome to the Calgary Power Platform User Group meeting for February 21st. We're really excited about today's topic, so let's get moving along here. So just some virtual meeting reminders here. So this may operate a little differently because we are using a different format. As you may have noticed, if you've been in our user groups before, we typically host them through Teams. We're actually using a product called Restream that Mike Carlo uses, so we're doing things slightly differently. But this meeting will be recorded, so that part doesn't change, and we'll have them available on our YouTube channel in addition to Mike's channels. If we do have any questions, I believe it's just chatting in the Q&A window here, but we'll actually let Mike maybe talk briefly on that once we get over to him in a little bit. So yeah, we'll have a chance for doing a little bit of Q&A as we move through the actual materials themselves. Okay, so the agenda for today. So we'll spend 5 minutes just quickly introducing the group, who we are, how to kind of keep in touch, and when the next user group meetings are. Then from 12:05 to about 12:45, we're going to talk about skills for enterprise Power BI. And as I mentioned a couple days ago on LinkedIn, I think this is actually one of the most important topics in Power BI right now. I really love a lot of the features and things like that, and how Power BI continues to evolve. But all that is, quite challenging to put into practical use if the users aren't even aware of what the tool can actually do and the different skills that are needed to actually take Power BI to an enterprise level. So this is a topic that I'm very excited about and very excited to have Mike Carlo speaking with me on today. And then we'll have time for doing a little bit of Q&A as we go through. But once again, maybe I'll let Mike just talk a little bit about how Q&A typically works on this platform here. Because sometimes we like to do Q&A during the session as well, instead of leaving it all towards the end. So once we do an introduction to him, we will flip over to that. All right, so just in terms of the group itself and how we kind of keep ourselves alive and well, there is a Microsoft community site. There is a QR code, looks like I'm covering it up here, for you to go ahead and connect into, which will be a listing of all of our, thank you very much, Mike, listing of all of the different Power Platform user group meetings that we host. We also maintain a presence on LinkedIn as well. And once again, there's a QR code there if you want to connect into the Calgary Power Platform LinkedIn page, and you can keep in touch with all the different happenings there. And just to let people know when the next meetings are, so the Calgary Power Platform user group meeting, the next one's going to be May 23rd. And then after that is all the way into September. So we do these every quarter, as we mentioned before, if you've been on the calls in the past. And we actually run the Calgary Azure Analytics user group as well. The next meeting is March 7th, and it says 2022 on there, but that should say 2023, so a typo on my part. And then June 6th, 2023, before we go ahead and take a break for the summertime. I do actually just want to highlight very briefly the topic coming up in the Calgary Azure Analytics user group meeting on March number 7th. We're really excited to welcome Scott Sewell. He is going to be talking about Azure Synapse Link. So that's often, as we see these products starting to overlap and blend together and things like that, we believe it's a topic that is not only of interest to the Azure crowd, but also the Dynamics crowd and the Power BI crowd, because there's a lot of things happening around Azure Synapse Links, and there's something in there for everybody. All right, and as we always kind of mention as well, is we want people to feel welcome to present, instruct, serve, and write. So if you're interested in getting involved in the Calgary Power Platform user group meeting, you can contact Maria DeSoma at the email address that's on the screen, and we would love to have other people getting involved in the group. All right, so without further ado, let's go ahead and introduce Mike Carlo. In today's topic, we're going to talk about skills for enterprise Power BI. Hello, Mike. How's it going?
It's going well. Happy to be here. Looking forward to talking more about enterprising skills for your teams and how this rolls out. I do a lot of work with enterprises today, and I'm seeing a lot of consistent trends across many kinds of organizations. So I think this will be a great conversation today. Looking just to kind of talk through topics. And for those of you who are joining online, thank you very much. Feel free to put any of your chat questions in the chat area of whatever your platform is. We actually have Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook running at the same time here. So wherever you are, we can snag those. So ready to go.
Perfect. And thank you very much for letting everybody know that, Mike. So as questions do come up, put them in the chat window, and we'll see if we can answer those questions as we're moving through the actual materials, maybe versus saving a particular Q&A period at the very end, but we will leave a bit of time at the very end to make sure we can talk about the presentation as a whole. So, all right, so the topic as a whole here. So managing the rapid growth of Power BI in an enterprise. I think as Mike alluded to a moment ago here, the two of us in our workings with many different organizations are witnessing, as I'm sure a lot of you are, an explosive growth within Power BI and the number of users that are using the product itself. And what we're, at least I'm seeing on our side, and Mike, you can definitely chime in as well, is we're seeing a lot of organizations kind of struggling with getting Power BI going in their organization and using it in a manner that, I personally would like to see people using Power BI in. So, there's various reasons for that. And we'll talk about a lot of those things as we actually move through today's discussion. So, we also want to talk about, as much as we see organizations struggling, there are organizations that are succeeding and working very well with Power BI. So we want to be able to, share some of the secrets that those organizations are, that they have, so you can ultimately succeed with Power BI as others as well. So I don't know, Mike, do you have any opening comments on kind of what I said there around the growth of Power BI and how it's kind of being used and the struggles people are having?
Yeah, and I'll give you maybe a broader trend. I mean, Power BI is a part of the ecosystem. So we talk about things that are moving the world here technology-wise. I think we're seeing an inflection point around a lot of neat technology. I mean, again, even more so that we're seeing like things like ChatGPT showing up, people being more comfortable with like leveraging computers and technology. And what is happening is we're having analytics or insights or technology is changing, and we're less around writing code these days, and we're using more around a user interface that helps us build, a data platform or a report, which in some cases I would feel like it's more like a data app, essentially, right? There's some really rich things that we can produce here. And so I really like the story of Power BI because I came from the Excel world, and I'm seeing a huge shift in, the individuals that need to be technically capable around working with data. This is your business frontline workers. They're information workers. They're working on information all the time, every day to make solid decisions. And for the first time, we're seeing this blend between a very heavy IT-based tool being brought to the hands of the business. And I think you're going to continue to see this in just many different tools, Power Apps, Power Automate. These are highly technical tools behind the scenes that are being made simple. There's a graphical interface. You kind of click and drag and make some things happen. And automatically code is being written for you. So as we look at these innovations that are coming, I think we have to adapt. And I think as businesses, we need to be learning about what this looks like and how to leverage these tools, because whether it's Power BI or some other tool that comes out, this will change fundamentally how you run your business, and it'll create efficiencies where there have never been the opportunity before. So I think it's really exciting to be in this area, in this market particularly. And I'm just a big fan of doing things with data. So it just happens to be this is the tool that I really love to work with.
No, and I totally agree with you. And the one thing that's, as I've been noticing, because I've always kind of tried to be a little bit of an academic. So we do an awful lot of teaching. I love teaching, speaking, and things like that. Plus, we also do, I myself, my career, have done a lot of implementation work. So not just the academic theoretical side, but also kind of how things actually practically can work in an organization. And one thing that I've certainly noticed over the years is that, speaking from a business user's point of view, is that having more and more of a IT 101 skill set, at least from a data perspective, can go a long way. And I think really what we're seeing there is that there's the technology trends are pushing their way more and more into the business. There's no more that solid line between IT and what IT does and only does and the business themselves. We're noticing a lot of the blending of skills.
Yeah.
And this is something I've noticed over my career in business intelligence and analytics all along, is that it's a very business-centric activity, and it's a very technical-centric activity. So they both need to come together. So that's kind of part of this awareness here, is saying, well, here's some of the things that you as a business user, if you want to excel with Power BI.
Oh man, I like what you did there.
Yeah, so I think where a lot of the challenges end up starting with Power BI is we're going to center this around some myths. So, what are some of the myths that we commonly see around Power BI? And this is, you'll see this myth all over the place online. In fact, Reza Rad's written a little bit on this one right here. Is what happens when an organization approaches Power BI as being just a reporting tool? What are some of the challenges you see when that lens is put onto Power BI?
Yeah, so going in here to a little bit deeper around here, around, this is a large misnomer. And I think this to me, this comes up very evident when I start thinking about, or actually interacting with people who are in an interview for Power BI. Tell me about Power BI. What does it do? Why do we have it here? And so I think immediately we go to, let's call it the pretty side of Power BI, right? We immediately go to, well, there's visuals and there's pages and I can share data like that. Yes, that is definitely a part of the tool. But when you compare Power BI against many other tools in the industry, this is where I think a lot of the differences start to present themselves, right? We don't have these rich Power Query modeling engine. There's not this really rich interface of like Microsoft's been doing BI for many, many years, 30 plus odd years. SQL Server, there's all this really back-end great technology that's being brought forward and brought into this Power BI ecosystem. So to say Power BI is just a report tool is actually doing it a disservice. And I think while you talk to some of the experts in the industry, they talk about DAX as this language of information of how you write formulas against your data model. The DAX is easy to learn, but it's difficult to master, right? So, the topic is a mild wide, but it's also extremely deep as well. So you can kind of take this topic as deep as you want to go as you think about what you're trying to do. And again, I think it just alludes to the fact that there's just a lot more going on here than just a reporting tool. There's a whole lot a deeper layer here that we can also get involved with as well.
Yeah, we have a slide that I often show, and I completely forgot to put it in the deck today, but it's the classic report development flow. A business user asks a question. I want to be able to understand sales by some type of dimensionality, and then first question is, well, where do we go and get that data? So you find the data, you then bring it into your reporting tool in Power BI. Has the ability to connect into all kinds of different sources. And then you get to use this wonderful tool called Power Query to help out with what I still like to call the ETL process. Marketers love calling it a million different things, but at the end of the day, you're getting data from a system, you're cleaning it up, and you're putting it somewhere else. Good old-fashioned ETL. And if we just put our Excel hat on for a minute here, Bill Jelen, Mr. Excel, has been around for a long time. He proclaimed that Power Query was the greatest thing to happen to Excel in 20 years. Now, I'm talking about Power Query inside of Excel, but we are using it now in this context here inside of Power BI. But it's an incredibly powerful tool. And then, as you mentioned a moment ago or alluded to, you have the ability to then store data and then write business expressions on top of that using DAX, and then putting reporting on top of things. You have a portal for actually surfacing your reporting out inside of Power BI, and then you can go ahead and take advantage of a bunch of different security features to secure your content. So in a lot of our classes, we talk about Power BI being Excel on steroids, and sometimes I'm a little reticent to use that comparison, because then people start to think about that it's just a reporting tool thing again. But the fact of the matter is, a lot of people that are coming into Power BI are Excel users, and they come to the table with a bunch of different design patterns that they've had for 1, 2, 5, 20 different years. And you need to teach them the different ways to do things inside of Power BI. And whenever we do any training, I'd say the number one comment we get out of a business user that takes a Power BI course is that, I wish I would have taken this 2 years ago. I've been doing things this way for this many years.
Automate.
Exactly. You just showed me to completely change the way I do business. So automate. Back over to you.
And again, Power Query is one of these technology pieces that I'll lean on this again, not just a reporting tool, but again, this is how I started enjoying Power BI to begin with. I thought, so I was way back at the beginning. I think Chris, you were as well. Right? It used to be BI Online, and it used to be part of the SharePoint connector thing. And then, we were able to generate these visuals that would interact with each other. And then it turned into Excel with Power View was a part of this scenario. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. The fact that I could bring in data and then connect to it and then modify. But to me, the really big hook was Power Query. Power Query was really the exciting part. That's actually what got me started down this whole path, is learning that tool, because at the time I was a mechanical engineer bringing in like tons and tons of sheets of data from machines. I had a lot of machine output of data. And so I just needed an easy way to absorb that information. And again, I found that by spending the time to learn Power Query, I was able to automate a lot of the movement of the data from some source into my reports, which made things 100% easier. And then I started getting into pivot tables and like, wow, this is really easy. So the whole, I really kind of boil this situation down is there's two main use cases for data. Do I need access to data, or do I need insights on data? And when we start talking the insightful part of this, that's really, I think, where Power BI can shine. You can actually start crafting a story around what that data is doing. And that's really why I love working with this tool.
Yeah, and kind of going back to your comment there on automating. So you're talking about automating things. I would have to say, in all of our travels as a consulting organization, the number one starting use case for Power BI is automating an existing business process.
100%.
And often that we encourage people to do that, because it's kind of a change management thing. When you're moving from any other tool, and like I say, I always use Excel as the example because so many people are moving from Excel, is that it does take a little while to get comfortable with the new tool you're using. And you want to be able to keep on that path and not be scared of the new tool and jump back and revert to your old habits. So what we really try to do is, encourage people to start off with something simple, something safe with a small audience, small data set, and often say, let's just automate something that you find to be a huge pain in the butt. Maybe it's your sales reporting, which you say, you know what, we only run that twice a month because it takes us hours to pull it together and it's a pain.
Yep.
My boss would really love to have it every day, but I can't spend 3 hours every day stitching this stuff together.
Yep.
Well, use that as your starting point. And the nice thing too there is then if you're doing that, then you probably know the data, the quality, you can do some stuff around it, and it's a safe spot. So
I have a really good use case story around this. I was working with a client one time, and we were talking about a process in order. They were making 12 decisions a year. And so part of this too is like, one, it's automation for efficiency, right? To be able to do things faster. But when you start looking at automation, you can actually increase your organization's capability. And what I mean by that is, we had a process where it was taking us anywhere between 20 to 40 hours to produce a single report. It was a very comprehensive report, went all the way up to the executives, but it was everything. This is key to making decisions around what the organization was going to do. However, this report only came out at the end of the month. It only came out 12 times a year. And so you had 12 decision points throughout the year where we could pivot and say, based on the information we have, we need to spend more or less money in these various areas, marketing, sales, whatever that may be. So if you think about that's pretty impactful, and it helps direct the organization. The goal is to not get too far off track, that you're in the weeds and you're losing money more than you should. Then what you do is you start automating some of this. And then when you start bringing the data in an automated fashion, we were able to add so much more capability. Things that were not even physically possible before. If you think about it, if it took us 20 hours, if it takes you 20 hours to produce a report, that's a couple days of man hours of work. We were able to automate that down to like a couple hours of just running automatically by itself. So one, we were taking the time it took to do the work, compressing it. We're now automating it so it could run every day. So we added two things. We were adding capability to the organization. So now 365 times a year, we could make a decision. As soon as the data was being presented in the data warehouse, we could immediately start making decisions. So, not only are you automating to save yourself time, but you're now automating it in a way that you can now increase your organization's capabilities. That's huge. And that's going to be a competitive advantage for you.
Yeah. And I remember, probably a couple weeks ago, and you and I were kind of talking about the session, some of the things we could do to prepare is, I think you said the quote was that every year the footprint of Power BI users is essentially doubling, or something along those.
Yeah, that's about right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So by the end of the day, what that means is I still find it interesting in 2023 that I can bring a new group of 12 business users into a Power BI course, and they, for the most part, have never seen the product. which means, for all of you that are on this call here, there's a huge opportunity still. There are lots of runway ahead of us in terms of where we can take Power BI. And I really like what Donald said over here in the chat window here, is it's much easier to sell things if we can remove some type of pain. So
100%.
So, trying to sell Power BI in your organization and analytics and data culture, sometimes there is a bit of a grassroots bottom-up approach that needs to be taken here. And I think removing the pain is ultimately a very good thing to be doing.
I would 100% agree with that. And I would also I feel like it's a little bit of a give and take here as well, right? As we give the reporting and give access to the information and the data, like there's a so we're talking about governance, right? If we're talking about enterprise, right? There's a lot of times to be in the organization to be this silo to retain and keep everything in my little area. And so by removing someone's pain by giving them access to the data, you're then able to engage them, and they're having more of that conversation around, okay, well, tell me more about this tool. How can I learn more about the reporting tool? And what does it do beyond just the fact that I can get access to data through data sets or Data Hub and PowerBI.com, or what is this app thing we're talking about? You can then really start opening the conversation up. And now we can start talking about broader organizational goals like data culture. That's an entirely different conversation now that you can have by removing some of those pain points.
Yeah, so I guess maybe to wrap up myth number one here is that by believing that Power BI is just a reporting tool, you really underestimate just how much it can help you and your organization. So let's move on to myth number two here, which is actually, we've already started talking a little bit about myth number two, but myth number two is that I can just move from Excel into Power BI and be off to the races. I don't need to learn anything else. I can just pick Power BI up and start using it. What are your thoughts on that one, Mike?
Oh man, this is one that I see more often than not. Is yes, Power BI and Excel are very interconnected, and there's a lot of data concepts that move between the two. But when you really start going back and thinking about what is Power BI good at, what is Excel good at, there are two distinct kind of roles here about what each of the tools are doing. So, I think for sure, you want to be strategic about it because, and I think of Power BI. It's not necessarily the Power BI portion or the Excel portion that is really the impactful piece here. It's actually what I would call like a three-legged stool. The analysis services engine. And again, this is the thing that's kind of under the hood, the technology that we're exposing to you through the Power BI ecosystem. And again, this is also in Excel as well. So you don't have to build data models only in Power BI. So the horsepower behind all this thing is analysis services. That's the nugget here. That's where you're writing your DAX and your formulas on. And if you think about that as your central point, you're now defining common language around how does your data work together? What are the different tables that I'm talking about? I have customers, I have sales. These are general concepts that we're already building that kind of intertwined connection. We're VLOOKing up things. We're bringing data together. We're joining it so that we can have more insights around our information. That's all that the model is doing. So the data set becomes incredibly important when you start thinking about Power BI. And now when we talk about this three-legged stool, we can talk about, well, Excel could go grab data from a data model, or Power BI can go grab data from a data model. And now we have paginated reports, or making tables of data from Data Hub and PowerBI.com. Like the story around all three of those surface area tools are becoming more and more compelling. And so this is why we need to educate ourselves around the idea or the concepts of the model. Because the things that we used to do in Excel, we can do better and more efficiently now inside this modeling concept. So yeah, totally agree with that. Thoughts?
And I totally agree. In fact, we've got I always kind of like to use a little bit of analogy that, I guess people have probably heard this all the time, is it's a better together concept. As I emphasize to people whenever I'm teaching them Power BI, Excel is not going away. And I came from the school of thought back in the 2000s where it was more of an IT thinking that, it was kind of a, let's get rid of Excel in the organization. Everything's got to be an enterprise BI tools. Excel goes away. And every business user kind of looked at us and went, you're crazy. Excel's not going away. You're not displacing it. Yeah. And, fast forward all the way to 2023, it's a matter of using the two tools together and using them both to their strengths. So Excel is going nowhere. I'll kind of make that bold statement. I think it's a pretty safe wager to say Excel is going nowhere. It's a matter of just understanding how to use each of the tools to their strengths, because there's a lot of things that Excel has never really done well that Power BI does a whole lot better. And we can educate people on those types of things first when you say, Power BI isn't just a reporting tool, and we want to, teach people how to start unlearning some of the things that they've kind of done in Excel for a long time so they can use Power BI more effectively. And I also kind of like to use another analogy is that probably back in 2017, I think I wrote there was once an Excel exam, certification exam, and spent a long time writing that book for Microsoft Press. And I like to joke that I made probably about $2 or $3 an hour when I wrote that book. And now probably 2/3 of that book belongs in the garbage can, because what we used to talk about doing inside of Excel, actually portions of that now should be done inside of Power BI and use Excel to its strengths. So, and that causes a lot of people to go, whoa, what do you mean you throw that in the garbage can? And I then back it up by saying Excel's going nowhere. Use the two different tools to their strengths. And the problem with just coming into Power BI with just saying, I can do it exactly the same way I did in Excel, is I sometimes joke that organizations end up just moving their same Excel hell that we like to talk about into Power BI for an additional $9.99 a month. So you haven't actually solved any of your problems. You've repeated the exact same things with a brand new tool and paid more for it.
Yes.
Is that really where you want to be? That's not a good spot. So, you kind of alluded to some of this stuff here a moment ago as well, as there's things inside of Power BI, and you actually did a very good job clarifying me a few days ago, where I said inside of Power BI, the goal should be fewer reports and fewer data models. But then I realized I didn't put that in the context of Excel users. From an Excel user's perspective, if you're using Power BI to its fullest, you have this longer term goal of fewer data models and making them shared and securing them and governing that. And then ultimately having fewer reports, and then once again, running them through that governance process. So that you almost end up with a less is more kind of scenario in a governed way. And when we show people just some of the basic pieces of Power BI, like I just mentioned there, that's where the light bulbs start going off, and you say, okay, now I see where we can do this. And I always kind of like to say too that I feel like, been around BI for a long time. I feel like what Power BI presents us right now, we're closer than ever in our organizations to building a true central version of the truth, because the tooling is there. The next thing that needs to start getting built up is the data culture, the collaboration, and things like that. That's kind of the next thing, which we'll actually talk about here in a little bit as well. So, what are your thoughts on that, Mike?
Yeah. So I imagine, most organizations, and again, this is a lens of the world that I guess you observe, because you get to see this so many times in so many different organizations. So many times I show up and say, talk to organizations about what's happening in their ecosystem, what are they building? And what I find is many organizations feel that the challenges or issues they're dealing with is unique to their business. Like we're unique. And in reality, when you stand back and really take a broad lens at all these different businesses, everyone struggles with the same things. Everyone has customers. Everyone is selling something. There is revenue being generated. There's a lot of, yes, there's definitely nuances in a lot of businesses and how you go to market with those things. And those are differentiators for your business. But at the end of the day, data is data, and you need information to make decisions about what's going on. And there are related ways these elements of data relate to themselves. And this is one of the reasons why I work in so many different industries, right? Some people will say, well, I'm in the finance industry, or I'm in the manufacturing industry. Well, my business, my consulting firm, works in almost all industries. We're almost everywhere, because at the end of the day, data is the information. Like that is the oil, or to use that terminology, it is the oil that makes the engine run at this point in time. So I feel like to think that a pure Excel user can just come in and just straight up, I think the length of your Power BI experience will be limited unless you take some time to really digest and understand how Power BI works and where the key differences between Power BI and the Excel world. Because I've seen, again, for multiple people, there is an effective value by just jumping in and starting with Power BI, definitely right away. But if you're talking some advanced concepts or things that you want to learn, Power BI is bringing a bit more of this IT space into your arena. So taking some time to learn, what is a star schema? When I talk about dimensions and facts, what are those? Because understanding some of those fundamental IT concepts makes the report building experience much easier. And a lot of times when I find people get really bent out of shape here, particularly when Excel users come to Power BI, the DAX formulas are way too complicated, right? There's too much going on. And so all that really stems from your data model is too complex. We need to simplify your data model. You have bidirectional relationships where you shouldn't. You don't have a clean star schema. We have too many dimensions and not enough fact tables, or the other way around, or we're doing some interesting things from a modeling perspective. And yes, it will work, but is that really our sustainable data model that will be running very fast and efficient long term? So again, not to discourage you, definitely want you to get started and engage, but just know that there's a learning path and a track that goes longer term that really will help you to build that large benefit of reusing data, reusing a model over and over and over again.
Yeah, and I think I kind of agree with you. Is we talk about a lot of these things, and I think the aim is not to overwhelm people about all the different things Power BI can do.
Mm-hmm.
It's meant to educate, and if you're able to kind of step back and say, "Oh, well, here's the bigger picture. Here's what I can do."
Yeah.
And as we'll talk about in a little while here, you can orient yourself in your business. Say, well, what type of user am I, and how deep do I really need to go with Power BI? So I'm kind of excited to talk about some of that stuff here in a little bit. So, kind of talking a little bit about some of those things is that the next myth here, myth number 3, is I can learn Power BI by just watching a patchwork of YouTube videos and blogs. And I remember sitting down for dinner with Alberto Ferrari once, and we were kind of talking about this. And he said, this is where a lot of the problems really start with Power BI, is that sometimes people are just kind of getting into using it. Good to start using it, but then you have to know when to kind of step back and say, am I using this properly? And then, you get the ones that are just, I've watched this YouTube video, this over here, and I've kind of built my data model out. And you kind of, first thing we like to say when we go into an organization is, can you show me your data model? And then usually that is fraught with all kinds of bidirectional relationships, many-to-many relationships. And we in the Power BI world know that's kind of not the right path to go down, especially as you are a new user to the product. So really, I think this does a bit of a disservice to product. And don't get me wrong, I use YouTube a lot. I read lots of blogs, but it's very important to have that foundation and knowledge about the product first, what it can do, so you're oriented in the product. Then YouTube videos, blogs are immensely useful. And to kind of maybe finish the analogy up here, I would never go off and build a house by saying, I'm going to buy a piece of land and just watch a bunch of YouTube videos. You can only imagine what that house is going to look like in however long it takes me to finish. So what are your thoughts on that topic, Mike, or this?
Oh man, so many thoughts. Well, first thoughts, right? One source of really good information, hopefully you find, is at least the Power BI Tips YouTube channel. So we'll start there. You won't learn everything from me, but I definitely say, there is a lot of great content. What I'm also finding too is, in this information age, when it's so easy for everyone to come out with a YouTube video or produce some content now, tools are becoming much easier to use. Discernment will be increasingly important. Discerning who are the experts, where are you getting information from? So a lot of these fundamentals is you want to go to the experts in the industry and really focus on their expertise and what they're working on. Start with them and learn from them. There's a lot of great books. Sometimes it just takes some dedicated study time. And again, I have studied these things, but a lot of times I've gone out to read other individuals, read other books that people are putting out, internalize them. And one thing I'll use very candidly, everything I've learned about Power BI to this point has really been from the internet, whether I've bought a class on the internet, or I've gone to experts on the internet, or I bought a book from the internet. Like, you can literally get everything you need and bring it in-house and learn what you need to learn. I did not pay schools to do all this, but I paid other very specific knowledge experts to bring the information to me. So, I would 100% echo, like, there is lots of content available to you, and pick the people that say things that make sense to you. Pick the people that are teaching it in a way that makes sense to you. Some people love on-site training. Great, let's find some of those. Some people love, going on an online class and doing a self-paced training thing. I think those are very important things. At the end of the day, right? I would even go as far as saying that YouTube videos is being it's good. It's a good place to be, but I really encourage people, if this is something that you're passionate about, if this is something that you want to really push into your career, I'd highly recommend talk about this with your manager. Show the value of what you're doing there and actually try and work with them to put goals on your calendar, goals in your yearly goals list of, hey, I want to learn these XYZ new things. I want to go to these specific training things and let me get educated in these spaces so I can come back and bring that knowledge back to the business and be a leader around things that we're doing with Power BI. I can't speak highly enough for doing that self-driven, motivated layer of learning here as well.
Yeah, and that's actually, I'm going to use that as a segue into the next myth here. So myth number 4 is that Power BI does not require IT involvement. And where I like to go with this is think of yourself as a new user into Power BI, having, people around that can kind of help you out and guide you around the product. Because, usually in the day, IT people have a little bit more technical ability than a lot of business users. And that's not always the case. But, Power BI, if you ultimately want to succeed on having some IT involvement and not, full on IT control that says no, but involvement in terms of how to use the tool well, some design principles, and just around the tool itself. I think this is a really important thing. And I think it really drives towards something we'll talk about later on, is just the level of collaboration, communication, and communities of practice and things like that we'll see a little bit later on here. So what are your thoughts on Power BI does not require IT involvement, Mike?
Well, I mean, I think at the end of the day, like there's a lot of things that you can do that would make you extremely capable in working with your Power BI environment. But as we think about more of what happens at the organization level, right? This is talking about some great recommendations that Microsoft produces. There's kind of 3 main recommendations I would push to organizations. Now, depending on where you're at in the organization, right? If you're the frontline worker, yeah, you might focus a bit more on being the best at building Power BI reports and the best at modeling. But if you're more of an administrator or you're leading BI initiatives, I really think you're going to focus on executive sponsorship. You want to focus on a center of excellence, a team of people that are required and actionably working on things and developing things for the BI platform. And then you're working on, how do I continue growing that data culture with the community of practice? And so that is a very strong connection between all these areas. And so as a leader in these BI spaces, you need to be thinking about this. How do I roll out this report? How do I give a regulated access to this information? Some of the things you're going to be putting in Power BI are going to be highly sensitive. I've had instances, or I've heard of instances where people have released Power BI salary reports where that's an analysis that we're going to do. Who's got what salary across the organization? Where do people fall? All that kind of great stuff. And if it's not shared correctly, you're inadvertently sharing across the entire organization people's salaries list. And organizations definitely do not like that. So without the right proper engagement and layering within IT, and this is a moniker that I use all the time on the podcast and the things that I do, is you want to think like the business, meaning you want to act fast, move quickly, but you want to think like the business, or act like the business, but think like IT, right? Think with sustainability. Think with like, how do I repeat this? How do I get a dev test prod environment? And that was one of, I think, my weaknesses as a business user coming into the Power BI space was I was the business user. The Excel sheet that I built was the answer. That was it. I only needed one of them. I didn't think about repeatability. I didn't think about automating as much as possible. And so in working with Power BI tips and consulting now and working with Seth, a lot of times I've learned a lot more. There's a lot more to this that is the sustainability portion. And frankly, as your Power BI grows, you don't want to be in charge of everything. You need more people to help you out with this. And one of those key players will be your IT organization, because there are some deep connection points. Again, talking about, IT has traditionally been focused on building all the reports and getting you access to data in a secure way. That is changing now. The Power BI ecosystem is now changing how we deliver content to individuals. I can access a report. I can access a scorecard, a data set, a data flow. And there's all these different other areas that I can go get information from. So depending on what I need, I now need to work with teams of people to figure out what's the best way to distribute that content. How can I leverage that one way or the other?
Yeah, and I think the key there is, and you kind of alluded to it, is the collaboration, the communication, and the teamwork across IT in the business. And I have to say that over the last couple of years, I'm feeling a lot less of what there used to be, that IT business divide, and a lot more collaboration, communication happening. And maybe that's just in the organizations that I get to work with, but I feel like that is slowly starting to fade away. And some of the examples that I use is if I'm ever teaching somebody what we like to call our level 1 Power BI skills, I often say that at some point you're going to run into a problem with Power BI. I can only teach you so much in a couple of days. You will run into a problem. The challenge for you is going to be knowing who to go talk to help you through that problem. And a lot of times it is that, that wider community organization. And I'll just use an example. So you start building something up in a sales model, and next thing you know, you've got 1 million rows, 2 million rows of data, 4, 5, 10, 20, 30, and you start going, wow, my model's loading a lot slower the last little while. What can I do for model performance? And that's often a line that most business users start to struggle a little bit with. So the first thing that somebody who knows a little bit more about Power BI might say is, well, are you doing a full refresh, or are you doing incremental load? And is there a way for us to actually take advantage of incremental loading with the data you're taking a look at? So you will run into problems with Power BI. That's going to happen. The thing is, how do you actually work your way around them, and work your way around them in a sustainable approach? And like I say, some of the organizations we get to work with have those communities of practice and have the users that can come and support and say, now that you've kind of started drifting that way, do this, and you're going to improve the performance of your application. Or, hey, I just ran into this many-to-many relationship. What do I need to do about this? I forgot. Oh, well, just deduplicate your dimension table, and that's going to get you back to one-to-many usually. Things that users don't think about because they haven't done it enough. But as long as you have a way to kind of lean on people, you can ultimately get Power BI to a lot of wonderful things.
Yeah, and there's a question in here talking about are any major tips around influencing executives and the value of the Center of Excellence, particularly as it relates to your executive responsors? This is a great topic, and I think many organizations struggle with this one. I sent out 2 links. So the first link is from Microsoft themselves. They have this great thing called the Power BI Adoption Roadmap. And as you think about the adoption roadmap, one of the key areas of many organizations to find success within their businesses is to use that executive sponsor or identify one and regularly meet with them. So there is going to be a sponsor of Power BI to some degree in your organization. But if you want your Power BI environment to be successful, engaging with them, telling them why it's valuable to get engaged with Power BI, what is the value you're bringing to the organization, and then regularly, and again, it may not come from them initially, right? They may not get the vision that you see or the value you're seeing down at the report and sharing level existing. You may need to push into that a bit more. So I work with organizations where we talk a lot about what does governance and administration look like, and how can you win there? Building a knowledge library, putting document and materials in the same place, building data models that are efficient and shareable, but then producing information and documentation around them that helps it be used over and over again. I think this really makes sense. And at a minimum, I'd highly recommend, if you don't have an executive sponsor today, or if you have one who's not very engaged, set up regular time to meet with them quarterly, engage with them, reach out to them. Hey, here's what I'm building. Put together your own little release plan. Hey, I'm building these key data models that are adding value here in this team, in this department. I'm just want to let you know what's going on. Here's what I'm doing. Here's what I'm building. Look at all the number of people using this report. And I think by communicating that upwards, you can get them to start buying into this vision of, hey, Power BI is more than just the reporting tool. Again, this kind of speaks to our earlier conversation. It grows to be more around, where now we're using the tool to drive data culture. We're using the tool to share best practices. We're using the tool to more aptly access our information. That's when this really starts taking another level here. So the links in the chat will hopefully help you kind of direct you towards a direction there that talks more about how to engage executive sponsorship, what techniques and things you can use. There's a great page of information in Microsoft Docs right there as well.
Yeah, and I think some of the challenges here, and hopefully, I shouldn't say hopefully, the links you put in the window definitely will help you out with that, is a lot of times the executive don't see the problem. They ask a question, and the only challenge they ever get is, I didn't get my answer quick enough, or I got conflicting information. And they usually move on from that pretty quickly to the next big thing they're taking a look at, right? a business user or executive asks a question, and then in below them, this team of people scurries around and is kind of running all over the place and doing things, and it takes them days or hours to pull together. And they kind of sweat it all out and give it back to the executive. And the executive's going, great, I got the information I wanted. No problem here, right? Not realizing that under the surface is an entire mess. And like I say, usually the two pain points are I didn't get it quick enough, or the information I got in this board meeting, Mike is saying the sales is 1 million and Chris over there is saying it's 1.2. Mm-hmm. He's got the right results. Like, which one of these is incorrect, right? So, using those guides there, and then finding some of the executives that have those pain points and are that want to invest in trying to solve some of these problems that we're talking about here, and the techniques that we can do it will go an awful long ways. So let's move over to the next myth here, Mike.
Yeah.
So the next one here, myth number, what are we on here? 5, I believe, is Power BI can do it all. I use Power BI and it can do everything for me. What are your kind of thoughts on this one?
I think this is going to allude a little bit to my tipping my hand here a bit around the, well, I'll just throw away Excel and I'll just do everything in Power BI moving forward. There are distinct weaknesses that Power BI has. One of them, and I'll point out very clearly, is tables, or pivot tables even for that matter. Power BI is not the best at resolving large amounts of tables inside a report. It gets slow. You have a lot of data coming back to that report layer, exporting data or getting pages of data out of Power BI. It's not really pixel perfect level reporting. And so that was a service that we had from SSRS. You had to develop these RDL files and build this SSRS reporting. So there was a lot of other really rich tools that were very, very catered to a very specific reporting need. Power BI has a lot of these capabilities, but maybe it's not always the best choice. And so I definitely think we want to be creative in how we think about, again, I will say, going back to this concept of the model, the relationships, defining what that looks like. And I was a big fan of Microsoft Access databases. I loved them. I thought they were so cool. So I love the Access database. That's how I started learning how to write some SQL. I could graphically stitch things together and SQL just would kind of pop out. I'm like, oh, okay, so that's how that works. So you can start learning the syntax of things. And so I think Microsoft does a really good job of taking some complex code generation elements and designing a graphical interface around them. And that's really what Power BI does to some level. So I really like where Microsoft is going with this. Again, I think the trend, that whether it's Power BI or something else, regardless, the trend will be we are going to get more and more tools that are going to be easier to use at larger scales of information, where I can just click on buttons, drag things around, and stuff will appear and just work inside my environment. I mean, you already see with Power BI and Power Apps, the number of reports and the number of applications that we need to build the next 10 years is going to be insurmountable. So unless we build better tooling to make this faster and easier to produce data in and out tools that we're doing here, we're not going to get to the scale that we need to be providing higher levels of efficiency.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm going to take you talked about the kind of the business facing side of things. I'll kind of talk about, a challenge we see an awful lot is, when do we use pieces of the Azure architecture versus doing things inside of Power BI? Because there's often those questions, well, hey, I can just do everything inside of, Power BI, and why wouldn't I? Yes. I think of a couple things off the top of my head where, Power BI is not particularly good at, managing and developing type 2 dimensions when we're talking about dimensional modeling. And that's often an area where you need to move back into the Azure space. Yes. Power BI is not a place where you're going to store, your raw data files. That's typically where a data lake is going to, enter the picture. And you don't want Power BI storing, all that information. So there's parts where you do need to look at kind of what you're doing and say, which is the best tool for the job. And, if you only know Power BI, you're going to try to do everything with Power BI only. And that can sometimes, lead you down the wrong path. So just understanding from an architectural perspective, what tools should I be using where? Like when it comes to reporting, should I be using Excel or Power BI? When it comes to some of the backend stuff, should I use Power BI or should I use some of the Azure pieces? And once again, this just goes to the whole conversation. There's just being able to step back and making sure you're choosing the right tool for the job and not having a tool do something that's not particularly good at.
And I want to add some more context here around this one as well. So another opportunity I see here as well. let's think about the things that are inside Power BI. You have a couple main, let's call it hammers, that we're going to use to apply these different, force on these different nails that we see here in our problem, right? So one of them is Power Query, right? So Power Query basically generates extract, transform, and load procedures. We can build an automated way to load information into a single table. Again, you can do some merges in Power Query. Yeah, that works. But realistically, the output of Power Query is a single table of data. So we have this data engineering tool one that's very helpful. Then the second part of the Power BI ecosystem is this, again, the modeling, DAX, relationships, building that together. That, to me, that eludes a lot of like what I used to do in SQL or the Azure, the Access databasing, right? I could build all these tables and then basically define the relationships. This is how this information is merging. And that's really what I would do. Like I'd do a lot of VLOOKUPs, or I would build, things inside Excel that would look up data and match it to what I needed to match by. So that's another great tool that we have at our disposal here. And then the last portion we have is we had the report side, where we can create reports in an interactive way. And so that can then be shared through the PowerBI.com service. So when I think about all these different tools, the business technically can lead a lot of what the IT organization needs to do. The challenge of why we don't just do everything through a data warehouse anymore is because it takes too long. I don't want to wait 6 months to have my data produced. So I'll just go to this system, I'll extract what I need here, and I'll extract a little bit from there, and I'll kind of make this little soup of data, and I'll stitch it all together. And that's the advantage. This is why we want to, act like the business, move fast, deliver something, find something of value. And if you think about it, what we're doing right now is we're basically making the Power BI ecosystem a commodity. We're commoditizing data-driven things. We're building this as a commodity. So the idea here is by the technology becoming so easy to use, and again, Power BI Desktop is free. Go find another visualization tool that is free and has so much capability as Power BI. You'll be hard pressed to find it to just go download it and start using it on your own. But at the end of the day, you want that business team building the tables, building the relationships, stitching the data together, because often you'll find as these models get larger, as the size of things increase, you'll need engagement from other types of tools. And so this is where I like a lot of this is there's a grow up story that comes with Power BI as well. We build something that works, it starts to slow down, but I can easily hand this tool over to somebody else or back to my IT organization and say, look, here's how I built the tables. Here's what I did from a data engineering perspective. And you lose so much of that when you just copy paste data inside Excel. You have to write a procedure. In Power Query, I can literally go through and click through each step, and I can see how the data started and how it ended. And that's just so impactful from an expression standpoint. We can remove, if you read Rob Colley's book, and I put the link in the chat window a while ago, but in Rob Colley's book, if you took a project and wrote 1,000 lines of code, if you just gave someone 1,000 line of code to write and say, here's the final solution, just go build it, and you have them type it out, maybe it's a couple days worth of work just typing out that information. However, to produce that application took months of time talking with other people, getting business rules out, figuring out how to build this entire application. And the reason because there's so much lost in communication between multiple people, and you have to get everyone on the same wavelength to agree about what we're going directionally. Sometimes it just makes more sense to just self-develop. And I think this is really what we're seeing now is there is for the first time that I've seen, there's a great blend of a tool that can be very business facing, but then can be easily handed over and lifted back to the IT organization to produce immense amount of value with that grow up story. And that's so compelling for me.
Yeah, and what I really like about that, and kind of building on the point you're mentioning there, is that if I think back to my early days in analytics, I would have to say we wanted to data warehouse everything. Everything had to go through the data warehouse.
Yes.
And that was a very slow and arduous process because there's change management, testing, all kinds of different things. And the business, the queue on the IT work could grow up really large, and then people could never get their work done, and they grew frustrated, and they went back to their Excel spreadsheets. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the way things were, and some organizations still operate that way. But now what I really like, one of the things I really like about Power BI is let the business users go and do some of that work on their own and sort their way through their requirements gathering. What exactly is it I'm trying to do? Where exactly is my data? What exactly are the problems with it? and take it a long ways down the line. And at the end of the day, you as an IT user may never have to touch that model, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But maybe that thing that got built up has now got 5 users, 10, 20, 30, more data, and it's becoming significant to the organization. So at that point in time, you kind of have to look at it and say, do we want that sitting in Mike's hands where he has to do everything by himself and it's under one person? Or do we want to look at transitioning that now over into the more formal organization to document it, clean it, refactor it, and operate it in a 24/7, 365 manner? And I think the good thing about that is by the time it gets to the IT group and in their queue, it's been fleshed out. We know what we want to do, and there's no more guesswork. And then you get to refactor it and then deliver it. And what I love to say to the business users is you can now move on to something different. And I was just teaching a class a couple weeks ago, and I used the analogy that, wouldn't you like to be able to go off on a vacation and not get a phone call that your Excel spreadsheets have cratered and you're the only one who knows how to fix it? Or I put things into my workspace in Power BI and I'm the only person who knows how to fix things. If you want to feel those calls on your vacation, well, I was going to say good on you, but probably not. I'd rather enjoy my vacation. Those things need to move under a different type of management system. So you have to know where that line is to say, I've taken it as far as I can. I need to push it somewhere else. And now at least that team that picks up on it knows what it looks like and can kind of build some shared data sets and stuff like that and ultimately get it into the shared environment. That user gets to move on to something different and find that next piece of business value versus what we see a lot of organizations. That user is now buried under that one thing and they can no longer add additional value to the organization. I see this time and time again with fellow accounting professionals that have just buried themselves in a few things and they can't go anywhere else. Or that person leaves the organization and now the organization has a whole pile of risk. So yeah, I think that's a really big thing, is being able to do that, all that type of stuff. So let's see here. We've got like 2 minutes left here. So I'm just I'm flipping my way through my slides here. So I've got a bunch of things that I wanted to cover here. Oops. Sorry, I should have had a Q&A slide here to see if there's any final.
I've been catching them as they came along. So there's the only question that kind of came up here, I think, towards the end. People were asking for some of the links. So I was able to share those links on the YouTube channel. And then someone was asking around, where do we see ChatGPT working and integrating with the Power Platform? We'll see. It'll be interesting to see where this comes into play. Microsoft has already integrated ChatGPT into their Bing browser. So I have to imagine it's eventually going to make it everywhere else in every product they're going to have. In the next couple of years here, there won't be a product in the world that won't be touched by some level of AI, and you're already seeing it today. So I think it's just very interesting to see where this is coming. And I'm actively using ChatGPT for things that I do at work all the time. It makes sense. So if I'm finding so much value from it, there's going to be integrations with that tool, I think, across every other Microsoft product that you're going to see out there. So I think it's just a matter of time before it comes out.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited to see where it's going to go. I'm going to let the initial hype kind of play itself out a little bit here and then kind of come to the table, see where things are ultimately going to go. So, Mike, we're almost at 1 o'clock Mountain Standard Time here, I guess 2 o'clock in the Central Time Zone. I actually had a whole pile more stuff I wanted to talk about, and we got going on those myths for so long here that we actually never got to the content. So I guess in theory here, we could have a whole other discussion based on the other half of the deck that I put together that you saw me speed through. But, just maybe respecting everybody's time, including yours, Mike. I really want to, thank you for speaking at this month's Power Platform User Group, using your streaming platform. I really enjoyed this topic. And we're going to hear a lot more about this over the next little while. It's just, using Power BI properly at enterprise level and what's it going to take to get there. And there's still going to be a lot of struggles and a lot of opportunities for a lot of people in the next couple of years. So for those of you on the call, thank you very much for attending, and we very much appreciate you attending, and thank you for your time, Mike.
Sounds like we have a round for a part 2 of this. So it sounds like we should come back and jump straight in. No more myths. But I think some of the main topics there, and as you were zooming through some of the slides there, we talked a little bit around just some key aspects of this. We talked about, training being important. We talked about the center of excellence. We talked about governed content. We talked about data-driven culture. These are all kind of things that we kind of roughly touched on a lot of these myth pieces. So I definitely think this would be good for another separate topic that goes a bit more deeper on all these. How do we skill up? Like, what's the next level beyond to where we get? So yeah, I appreciate your time today. It has been super fun. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Yes, thank you very much, Mike. You have a great day.
Take care. We'll see you next time.
Bye, everybody.